Hello everybody, and welcome to my very first review ever, and my very first Game of Thrones review. This one, of course, we're starting at the beginning, because that's what makes sense. And it's about episode 101, which is called Winter is Coming. And there's a lot to talk about in this episode, because it's the one that started everything off. And we start, of course, with the Night's Watch men going on patrol out past the wall, and get a good view of the tunnel that they take through the wall, and how massive the place really is. And so they go out. You get to see also a scene that we'll see later in the series, but like I said, I'm not going to try to give away any spoilers. So anyway, they're going out on their patrol to discover what's been going on beyond the wall, since that is their job. And they actually go, and one of them, I believe in the book his name was Will, although they don't actually say his name on the show at any point, as far as I can remember. But anyway, they go out, and he finds several pieces of dead bodies strewn all over the place, and a little girl who looks like she's kind of knifed, pinned to the tree, and her eyes are open. And it's kind of like a art project for whoever killed them, with them all spread out in patterns. And obviously this shakes the Night's Watchman a little bit, and he goes back to the rest of his men and tells them what he saw, obviously. And when he leads them back to the place where he saw all the dead bodies spread out and in patterns and all that fun stuff that just lets you know this show is gonna get weird at some point. Of course, the guy who's in charge of this patrol, Waymar Royce, I think might be his name. But like I said, they don't actually say the name in the show. And it's in the prologue of the book. I've only read 1.5 books, so I'm not going to be, doing a bunch of book comparisons like so many other people do. If they didn't mention the names on the show, it's obviously not going to be all that important to the major scheme of things. But anyway, when he leads them back and all the bodies have disappeared, and obviously the other guys he's on patrol with think, that he's making it up, or don't believe him, or don't think it's really anything to be worried about. And so they go back, and the bodies are gone, and then you see them leaving the place where the bodies had been, and you hear like clicking noises that they don't really sound natural. And obviously there's something out there with them. And you finally get to see a shadow behind the lead ranger. Rangers is the ones that go out on patrol, which you'll find out later they have different facets in the Night's Watch. The rangers, the builders, the stewards, there might be another one as well. Anyway, so there's something standing behind the lead guy, and it's got blue eyes, and then the little girl who was dead a scene before seems to be semi-alive again, or alive, or whatever, but her eyes are really a very strange hue of blue. And then chaos ensues, and these creatures out in the woods end up beheading the Night's Watchmen, killing them, and it turns out that one of them actually does get away. We don't see him getting killed before it goes to the credits. Like, you're seeing I don't know if the screen caps are playing where they should be playing, that when we get to the credits, and then this guy who managed to escape from those creatures in the woods with the blue eyes, he gets caught by the men from Winterfell, and basically he's deemed a deserter because he abandoned his duty at the wall. And as we learn later, the Night's Watch oath is for life. So if you leave, that makes you a deserter, and that's punishable by death. And we also, at this point in time, meet our main family, and they are the Starks. Their homestead is called Winterfell, and the father is Eddard, also known as Ned Stark, and it is his duty to enforce the laws of the king. And by law, the man who escaped from the Night's Watch is a deserter and has to be executed. And it's Ned's job to do that. They point out also that their ways are the old ways, which is a reference to their religion. It's the first mention of a religion we get in the show. There's going to be many religions mentioned in the show. The Starks do worship the old gods, the old ways they call it. They will mention later that their religion is somewhat of a nature religion. It involves the weirwood trees, the trees with the faces carved into them, and is in some way linked to these ancient creatures that are sort of fairy-like, for lack of a better term, called the Children of the Forest. And these have supposedly disappeared years and years ago, thousands of years ago. Anyway, so he's on his way to kill the deserter, brings his sons with him, including the 10-year-old. The only ones I think that stay home are his 2 daughters, and his youngest son, Rickon. So, when he's about to execute the guy, he tells him, "I saw the White Walkers, and he's obviously very distraught. He knows that he shouldn't have left the wall, but he says that people need to know. They need to be warned of what's coming. And what he means by that is these White Walkers that he's talking about, and we can logically assume that the White Walkers are those blue-eyed, icy skeleton creatures that killed most of his patrol before he got away and came back to Winterfell. So, he's telling Ned that that's why he left. He knows it was wrong, but he wanted to make sure others knew what was happening up north, beyond the wall, about the danger that was coming. And in the execution scene, we see Bran say, he said he saw the White Walkers, and Ned writes him off as, a madman sees what he sees, Ned says. So he writes him off as being crazy because, of course, nobody's seen any of these White Walkers for thousands of years. Everybody thinks they're just myths and legends, and they never really existed and all that jive. And then he ends up killing the guy with his Valyrian steel House Stark sword, which we later find out is called ice. I don't think that's really spoilery. I'm just giving little factlets that I don't know how long it takes them to mention it, but it's not really going to give away a big part of the story or anything like that. Anyway, before all this execution scene, I kind of skipped past this, although the screen caps went over it. We met his family, Ned's family, the Starks, his wife Catelyn, and his children. In order, oldest to youngest, we have the oldest son, Robb, the oldest daughter, Sansa, the younger daughter, Arya, the younger son, Bran, and the youngest son, Rickon. Along with them, we also meet, I don't know if I said his wife, Catelyn, also, Catelyn, who was a Tully originally, which is one of the people from Riverrun, which is a place we'll hear a little bit more about later. Also, though, mixed in with these Stark children, the 5 Stark children, we also have 2 other younger people, and we find out that they are, they come to be introduced. I don't know if it's in this episode or later. I'm just telling you their names. It's not really. We have Jon Snow, who's the one that tells Bran not to look away when his father's executing the deserter. And we also have Theon Greyjoy, who's sort of like, it appears that he's sort of a squire to Ned Stark. And we found out a little bit more later about who Theon is, why he's there, and what that means, and what led up to that, and all that. It's not really that important at this episode, though, so we'll skip past that. Also, we met the daughters, and you could see that Sansa and Arya were being taught to sew and, things that girls should do in this time period. And the whole time, Sansa's being praised by the Septon, who is like a nanny, sort of. She's like got the thing over her head, like a nun of some sort. And she gets called a Septa, which I believe is like a nun. if you want to equate it to modern day. And Sansa's being praised about how good she is at her sewing. The whole time, it's kind of almost a background conversation, seeing the way Sansa and the Septa interact, because the camera focuses on the younger daughter, Arya, and her reactions to hearing the boys outside practicing archery and things like that, and she seems like she's way more interested in being out there than being, you know, in with the girls doing girl things. She's obviously would rather be somewhere else, namely with the boys. And there actually is a cute little scene later where Arya does run outside while Bran is trying to hit the target, and she hits it easily when Bran had been missing the target the whole time, and then she just hits this cute little smile on her face and runs away with Bran chasing her. But anyway, that's just a little introduction to the way the Starks interact with each other. A very happy, healthy family, other than the nasty, nasty look that Ned's wife gives Jon Snow. And it's obviously there's some kind of bad feelings between Catelyn and this Jon Snow character, who you think that he's one of the Stark children, but then, like in this scene later where they're leaving the execution and they find the dead dire wolf, he refers to Ned as Lord Stark. He doesn't refer to him as father, he refers to him as Lord Stark, which is an interesting little thing to mention. So obviously, he's not typically just a Stark child like the rest of them are, because he does, you know, address his father in a more noble way, a more impersonal way. I don't know if I want to use that word, but it's obviously not the kind of bond you see between Ned and his other children. They do say later in the episode, I don't know why I'm dancing around it, I'm always afraid of giving away something what comes up later, but they do say later in the episode that Jon is supposedly Ned's bastard child, so an illegitimate child from some other woman, which would explain a lot of Catelyn's animosity towards Jon, which we're going to see more of later, I'm sure. Alright, so we've talked about the Night's Watch scene, the execution scene, meeting the Starks, the way the children interact, the differences between Arya and Sansa. Let's see. What else do we need to mention? Well, if the caps are lined up accurately to the sound, we're seeing a little bit of the scene where they're coming back from the execution, and they find a dead dire wolf, and Theon, the one who's kind of like a squire to Ned, kind of, but not exactly, says, oh, it's a freak because it's so huge and it's bigger than any regular wolf and all that. But the important thing to remember, and I don't know if somebody's going to accuse us of being a spoiler, but the important thing to remember, I think it's very, very symbolic of future happenings, is, I mean, I didn't really notice it the first time I watched it, but if you go back and rewatch, you'll notice there's a lot of symbolism in this scene. The dire wolf has been killed by an antler of some sort, like from a stag. So just think about that for a second once you watch the later episodes. And also, this is where we might get a little bit into talking sigils. The sigil of the Stark House is the direwolf. The sigil of the current king is the stag, House Baratheon. And the direwolf's been killed by a stag, so it's an interesting little piece of symbolism that you think about more as you realize that later on in the episode, a Baratheon asks a Stark to come to the capital where the Baratheons are running the kingdom at this point in time. And obviously there's a little bit of hesitation on the part of Catelyn for her husband going to the rat's nest of a capital, as I believe it's referred to at some point in this episode. But anyway, another piece of symbolism in that scene is that the direwolf mother is dead, and all the little puppies are abandoned and left on their own. And I know it doesn't seem like much now, but just keep it in mind, especially when you talk about sigils of houses and all of that. So, now, if, like I said, if the caps and the audio are lining up right, because I have to do them separately, so we'll see. You're probably seeing the screen caps of our first views of King's Landing. And what's going on in King's Landing right now is that the Hand of the King, which is like the vice president, for lack of a better term, the Hand of the King is dead. And we've got two people discussing this off to the side of his funeral happenings, and we get our first really, really tiny glimpse of the Iron Throne, which is all made of swords and looks pretty cool. Obviously, it's much bigger in the books, which everybody keeps talking about, but I think it looked pretty cool anyway. Anyway, we've got the two Lannister twins talking about Jon Arryn's death. Jon Arryn was the Hand of the King. Robert is the king. The female twin is Cersei Lannister Baratheon. I don't know if she's actually going by Baratheon, probably not. But Cersei Lannister is the female twin, and Jaime Lannister is the male twin. And they're talking about Jon Arryn's death. And there seems to be something they're talking about is he discovered something that could put them in danger of possible death if he had told Robert. They're discussing that, what if Jon Arryn told Robert? And Jaime says, well, then we'd both be dead right now. So obviously there's some kind of secret between these twins that would lead to their deaths if the Hand, aka Vice President, had told the king, Robert Baratheon, what he had discovered. Let's see. So obviously there's a little something going on between the Lannister twins. And I keep saying the Lannister twins because a lot of people don't realize when they first watch the show that Jaime and Cersei are twin brother and twin sister. That's how they're related. And Cersei is the queen. She's married to Robert, and Jaime is the leader of the Kingsguard, which is like the royal bodyguard secret service, I guess you'd compare it to in current day. So, let's see. We have the twins discussing something going on that they didn't want the king to find out. But now the guy who knew that is dead. So, we go back to Winterfell at that point, and Catelyn tells Ned about this message she received from the Raven. They use ravens like carrier pigeons, and how they deliver messages between the kingdoms. And she tells him that Jon Arryn, the Hand of the King, is dead. And what's important about this is that Jon Arryn was basically like Ned's foster father. He was raised by Jon Arryn, trained to be a soldier by Jon Arryn. But Ned wasn't the only one that Jon Arryn took care of. His foster brother, so to speak, who was also raised and trained and brought up by Jon Arryn, the guy who's now dead, is Robert Baratheon, who is currently the king. So Robert and Ned were actually raised pretty much as brothers. Even though they weren't related by blood, they were raised as brothers. And that's why there is the look of sadness on Ned that seems like he lost a father, because Jon Arryn was basically like a father to him, even though it wasn't actually his father, but he was raised by him. So let's see, what else do we want to talk about here? So when she tells Ned that Jon Arryn's dead, they also say that the king and all of his people, his royal party, so to speak, are coming to Winterfell. And it's kind of an unspoken thing that both Ned and Catelyn know that the only reason that Robert would be coming to Winterfell is because he needs to ask Ned to replace Jon Arryn. And Catelyn seems very wary about this, and Ned doesn't seem very excited about it either, but at the same time, Robert is like a brother to him, and he doesn't want to let him down, and all that. So we skip forward from that to the king actually arriving at Winterfell with all of his quote-unquote family and his people and guards and all that, and we see all the Starks bowing to them and the whole royal introduction thing, and you see that there's a little, it looks like there's a bit of animosity between the queen, Cersei, and the Starks, but it's not really explained. She just like looks down at them. Now I don't know if you get from this that it's a personal gripe she has with them, or she just looks down at everybody because she's the queen and that's what she does. And plus she's a Lannister, and as you find out, they're the richest family in Westeros and kind of are known for looking down on a lot of people. But anyway, so they meet, and Robert and Ned get reunited, and he says he hasn't seen him for 10 years, or 9 years, or something like that. And it starts out where nobody's saying anything, but then, like, Robert and Ned just, you know, crack a joke and laugh at each other, and you can see that they really do have more of a brotherly best friend bond than a this is my king and I serve him kind of bond. Also, Robert, immediately, before even, like, sitting down or going inside or any of that, after traveling, I think that they said, for a month to get from King's Landing to Winterfell, at least a month, if not longer, I don't remember the exact day they said, that before he even settles down from the trip or anything, he wants to go to the crypts, which is kind of an odd request, unless you know some of the background. And this is where I said in my intro video that I'm not going to talk about things, specific things that happen in later episodes. I might hint at them and say, hey, this is important, pay attention to this. But I will talk about things that happened in the past. And in the past, Robert was actually engaged to Ned's sister, Lyanna. And he was very in love with her, and very happy about the impending marriage of their two houses. And long story short, Lyanna died before they could get married. And that's a whole other subject I won't go into right now. But Lyanna died before she could marry Robert, and Robert always feels like that's his biggest regret, that Lyanna died before they were wed, and that his life would have been completely different if he had actually married Ned's sister instead of getting married to Cersei Lannister, who is his current queen. So anyway, he wants to go to the crypt, which is where all the Starks bury their ancestors, the crypts beneath Winterfell. And we get a view of the crypts, and there's a statue that's supposed to represent Lyanna, and down in the crypts, Robert wants to go and see the statue of Lyanna to mourn her, even though it's been 17 years, I think, at this point, since he married Cersei after Lyanna's death and everything. So, down in the crypts is when he comes right out and says, you need to be hand of the king, you need to run my kingdom so I can go do whatever I want, because I'm the king and I can do whatever I want, and I need somebody to take care of things for me. Because, basically, they say this later, but it becomes obvious that Robert isn't really into being king. I mean, he was a great fighter in his time, and that's how he won the Iron Throne after 300 years of Targaryen rule. And, he isn't really the politician type. He's more a general than a politician. So him being king is just a bad fit, and he's not happy being king, but what are you going to do? That's what happens when you take over a kingdom. You got to run it. So he wants Ned to run things for him because he trusts Ned that much and knows that Ned is the kind of person who will run things the way they should be run. And that's why he has to come be the hand of the king now that the old one is dead, their foster father, essentially. And they go into a little bit of talk about Lyanna, Ned's sister, who had died almost 20 years prior, a little less than 20 years. But, and he goes on a little bit of a nostalgic trip here, saying, she should have been with me, and I murder him in my dreams every night. And that is another reference that's going to bring me to talking about things that happened before the show. And the person he's referring to is Rhaegar Targaryen. He is was the son of the previous king. And according to Robert's story, Rhaegar had kidnapped Lyanna and stole her from him. And that's where his hatred for the Targaryens started. Basically, Rhaegar took off with Lyanna, even though she was betrothed to Robert, and that started this whole conflict that led to Robert being king. The story goes that Ned's father and brother went to King's Landing, which is the capital, to get Lyanna back. However, when they got there, the Mad King, Rhaegar's father, had them killed. And there's a big story about exactly how that happened. It's kind of gruesome. But anyway, the Mad King, Rhaegar's father, had Ned's father and older brother killed. And obviously they didn't get Lyanna back. And actually Lyanna, I don't even think was there at the time. I think Rhaegar had taken her somewhere else at that point. But anyway, and that is the final straw that started the war between Robert and the Targaryen rule. And that's actually also what led to Ned marrying Catelyn. Because Catelyn was actually engaged to Ned's older brother, Brandon. But Brandon, who Bran is named after, when Brandon got killed by the Mad King, Rhaegar's father, Ned took up the reins and said he would marry Catelyn instead, because the whole point of the marriage was to ally Winterfell in the north with the Riverlands, which is what the Tullys ran. So Ned took up the reins and married Catelyn out of duty, because she was supposed to be married to his brother, but his brother was dead. So then they went off and did their whole war thing. And Lyanna was dead by the end of it, and that's why Robert hates the Targaryens in a nutshell. But anyway, there's a lot more to that story, but we won't go into it right now. We got to get through the rest of the episode. Okay, so we also get to meet Tyrion for the first time. Tyrion is the younger brother of the Lannister twins, Cersei and Jaime. The king's brother-in-law, technically. But he's a dwarf, and he's always looked down on by his family, except for his brother Jaime. As you can see, him and his brother Jaime have kind of a lighthearted interaction here, where Tyrion's with the red-haired prostitute, who we later find out is named Roz. But anyway, so Jaime walks in and brings Tyrion more prostitutes, so Jaime won't have to deal with the Starks by himself. He'd rather have Tyrion there with him, and that's just a cute little scene. It's not really that important, but it's an introduction to Tyrion, and he's like drinking and whoring and, you know, just the black sheep of his family, so to speak. Let's see. Then we get a segue when, well, this is, I'm kind of jumping a little bit back and forth, but when Robert is in the crypt with Ned, and they talk about the Targaryens, and Ned says it's done, all the Targaryens are done, or all the Targaryens are dead, and then Robert says, not all of them, and he looks all ticked and everything. And then we switch to the living Targaryens, and we finally meet Daenerys and Viserys Targaryen, the final two members of the Targaryen line from what we know at this point in time. And as you can see, they've got a very exact, distinct, I think is a better word, a distinct look. They've got the white blonde hair, and they're also supposed to have purple eyes, but they didn't want the actors to be wearing contacts the whole time, so they kind of dropped that. But they look like they could be twins, but they're actually not twins. Viserys is actually older than Daenerys, Dany, as most people refer to her, because it's easier than saying Daenerys, which is Daenerys, for those of you that keep spelling her name wrong. But anyway, it's Dany. We'll just call her Dany because it's quicker than Daenerys. But anyway, Viserys and Daenerys, we see them. The last supposedly living Targaryens, though there's a lot of rumors about who might actually be another Targaryen, but that's for another day. But anyway, they're two known to be living Targaryens. Actually, we do meet a few others, but that won't be until later. And I'm talking about it in the show, I'm not even talking about it in the books. We will meet, I think we might meet Aemon in, like, the next episode, or shortly. I don't remember exactly when we meet him, but that's not important yet. The point is, this is Viserys and Daenerys, and we see that they have a very uncomfortable relationship, I guess we'll say. It doesn't make it completely clear exactly how bad the dynamic between these two are, but you get the idea that Viserys is very overbearing, and he treats her more like a slave or property than his actual sister. And you see that by the way he, like, makes her strip and is touching her and saying, oh, you have to be perfect. And he's basically selling her off to some warrior in this scene. And I think in the show, she's supposed to be, like, 16, 17. In the book, she's much younger, but she's, like, a young girl. She's a teenage girl. And he's, like, I'd say, according to the show, maybe 20, 21, somewhere in there. And he's basically taking his baby sister, the only living relative that they know of, and selling her off to some warrior king. And obviously it's not a very healthy brother-sister relationship. And sorry about the background noise, but anyway, so this is where he's planning for her to marry a warrior king, because the whole point in this is that he wants the warrior king, Khal Drogo, that's his name, the guy that he's marrying Dany off to. He wants to marry her off to this king of the people known as the Dothraki. They're horse lords, warriors, kind of sort of like, they've got some similarities to the Native Americans, but obviously not exactly. He wants to marry her off to Khal Drogo so he can get Khal Drogo to give him an army so that he can go back to Westeros and take his father's throne. Because Daenerys and Viserys, I don't know how obvious it is in the first episode, but they are the two living children of the Mad King that Robert declared war on. So if their father had not been killed by Jaime Lannister in that rebellion, because at that point in time the Lannisters and the Baratheons were allied, and they helped the Baratheons take the throne from Rhaegar, Dany, and Viserys' dad, the Mad King Aerys, and they called him Mad because he was nuts. But they had 3 children. Rhaegar, the one who supposedly stole Lyanna from Robert, and then he had these 2, Viserys and Daenerys. And Viserys was a child. He was like 4 or 5 or so when all this happened. It's a little weird that there's such age difference between Rhaegar and his 2 younger siblings, but well, that's not that important. Anyway, sorry about that. Viserys is technically the only male heir to the king who was the king before Robert took over, and Daenerys is his sister. So they're the only 2 remaining of the last royal bloodline. So we meet them and see that she's getting sold off to Khal Drogo. And let's see. I've got the screen caps are over soon, so I'm going to try to, get through the rest of it pretty quickly. We go back to the feast, and Cersei has got her eyes on Sansa, and they try to plan an alliance between marrying Sansa off to Joffrey, who is Cersei's oldest child and the supposed heir to the throne. So we see that she's already got her designs on Sansa, and there's a little bit of a tiff between Arya and Sansa, and Arya gets taken to bed, and then we go outside and we see Jon again, and his uncle, Ned's younger brother, comes to this feast, and they have a little bit of a discussion about Jon wanting to join the Night's Watch, because Benjen, his uncle, is in the Night's Watch. So, obviously Jon is not happy with his current circumstances and wants to go to the Wall, which is where the Night's Watch, the men that we saw in the very first scene, are defending the kingdom. And then we see that Jon meets Tyrion, and I said it before that Tyrion is like the black sheep of his family, and Jon is obviously the black sheep of his family, and they semi-bond over that. And Tyrion has that famous line about never forget what you are, wear it like armor and it can never be used against you. And that's a very good Tyrion quote that a lot of people refer to. And obviously, even though the Starks and Lannisters don't seem to be very fond of each other, it seems like Tyrion and Jon, even though they don't like each other at first, you can see that they have a lot of similarities. And Tyrion does point that out as well. So, we've got that. And let me see, we've got a little confrontation between Ned and Jaime during the feast, and that's kind of cute. How Ned's saying he doesn't fight in tournaments because he doesn't want people to know how good he really is. And then after the whole feast and everything, we see Ned and Catelyn in bed reminiscing and talking about how Robert is and his people and all that. And then they get a message from Catelyn's sister Lysa. Yes, Lysa, not Eliza, Lysa, Lysa, Lysa. And she was married to Jon Arryn, the guy who was dead at the first scene of King's Landing, the guy who was Hand of the King, the guy that Ned is supposed to replace. And she sends a message to her sister Catelyn saying she's fled the capital and the Lannisters killed her husband, which lends a little bit of credence to that conversation between Jaime and Cersei about, oh, what if he told Robert what he knew. So obviously there's a little bit of believability to Lysa's message about how the Lannisters supposedly killed her husband, because obviously they were afraid of something he knew being told to the king. Let's see. Like I said, I'm just trying to get through it quickly because I know that the screen caps are almost done. We also then go to Dany and Daenerys and Khal Drogo's wedding. Yes, that's very quick. She just met and she's marrying him, I know, but hey, trying to get 1,000 pages into 10 hours. Anyway, at the wedding, she meets Jorah Mormont for the first time. It was somebody from Westeros who had fled Westeros. I don't think they mentioned it in this episode, but he had fled Westeros because of something that he had done there and was basically no longer welcome in Westeros. So he came across the narrow sea to the continent that Dany is on, and that's Essos. And she meets him for the first time at her wedding. And she's very thrilled to meet somebody else that can speak her language, and because obviously she doesn't even speak the same language as her husband, who she's now married to. And she also gets a very interesting gift from the guy who had been letting her and her brother live with him. Illyrio Mopatis is his name. But he gives her 3 dragon eggs that have been turned to stone because dragons all supposedly died 150 years before the show starts. And she thinks they're beautiful, and she's very thankful and seems very sincere and honest and appreciating the gift. And all I can say is her getting those dragon eggs is probably one of the most important plot points in Dany's entire story, so keep that in mind. And then her husband, Khal Drogo, takes her away from the wedding festivities, which were brutal and, you know, very warlike, because that's the way that her new people are. But he takes her over and gives her this beautiful silver horse. She actually names the horse the Silver. I don't think they ever say that in the show, but the horse's name is the Silver. And then Viserys makes his ever snarky comments about make him happy, and you can just see the look on Daenerys' face, because she's basically just being sold like a piece of meat, even though she's technically royalty and nobility. But anyway, so she goes off on her honeymoon from hell with Khal Drogo, and you see them on the cliffside as the sun sets, and she's crying and is very upset with being sold off to him, and he basically has sex with her, and that's the honeymoon. And it's not remotely gentle. And this is, keep in mind, this is a teenage girl who's never even, it's her first time, and it's kind of really brutal. It's pretty much like a rape, but, you know, she doesn't really fight him off because she's basically been raised to, you know, be a slave and do whatever she's told. But she's crying the whole time, and it's rough. And that's a big reason why they made her so much older, because they couldn't see doing that with a 13-year-old actress, because Dany's actually 13 in the books at this point in time. So anyway, we have the honeymoon from hell, as I said, and then we finally get back to the final scene of the episode. Yes, okay, now when I was first watching this show, the very first time, I started watching it during season 2, but I did watch, you know, all of season 1 before season 2 started, and then I started watching it with the premiere of season 2. But before I watched season 2, of course, I watched the first 10 episodes, because it doesn't make any sense to start watching a show without seeing the first 10 episodes. But anyway, the whole time I was watching this, I was thinking, that's interesting, but I don't know. And then this scene happened, and that's where it all turned around for me. And this is what made me say, okay, this show is different than anything else that's ever been on TV. So, the start of the scene is Ned and Robert going off to hunt, and because Robert at this point in time is still at Winterfell, and Ned's accepted his new role as Hand of the King, and this is their last little hunting trip before they go to King's Landing, and Ned takes his new job. So anyway, they're all the boys, older boys, like Theon and Robb and Ned, and Joffrey, I guess. Cersei's son, Joffrey. They're all going on the hunt, But the younger ones are left behind. Jaime doesn't go either. I think he's left behind to, look after Cersei and her 2 younger children or something along those lines. They don't really go into a lot of detail about why Jaime stayed behind, but that's an obvious assumption. But anyway, so Bran, waves to his dad as they go off on the hunt, and you see him, with a little puppy, the little direwolf puppy biting at his leg, and then they go off to play. And, well, his pants on his leg. The wolf doesn't bite him. But anyway, not important. But anyway, so Bran and Summer, which we haven't learned the name of the direwolf yet, but his name's going to be Summer. Yes, I know, a boy dog named Summer's kind of strange, but it's beside the point. Anyway, Bran and his wolf Summer go off to play, and Bran loves to climb, as we saw earlier in the episode. He's always climbing. That's how he saw Robert's party arriving, and his mom told him, no more climbing, no more climbing. And he said, okay. And she's like, I know you're lying because you always look at your feet. That cute little scene between them. But sure enough, here he is climbing again. And obviously the wolf can't go up the side of the tower with him. So you get a couple shots of Summer down below the tower as Bran is crawling or climbing up the tower. And it looks, well, look, it's a kid playing with his puppy. It looks like a very innocent and sweet scene. And then as Bran gets higher and higher to this, like, old abandoned tower or whatever it is, you start to hear, like, moaning or heavy breathing or something that just doesn't seem right. And he goes up and makes it to one of the windows out of the tower. And like I said, this is at the point where I go from thinking, okay, I guess the show's interesting, and by the end of the scene I was like, oh my god, this show's amazing. I can't believe they just did that. But anyway, he goes up and he peeks in the window, and sure enough, there's some people having sex up there. And at first, you only see the man, and that's Jaime Lannister, the Queen's twin brother, and the leader of the Kingsguard. And then we see who he's with. Da-da-da-da! It's Cersei, his twin sister. Yes, he's having sex with his twin sister. Yes, that's right. That is what just happened. Yes. And Bran saw it. And then, of course, they catch Bran. And Jaime grabs him before he can scurry away. And Cersei's screaming, oh my god, he saw us, he saw us. She's obviously upset. Obviously. And Jaime grabs him kind of like by the collar. And he's like, quite the little climber, aren't you? And he asks Bran how old he is. And Bran says he's 10. And Jaime looks back at Cersei and she's like really upset. And she's like, he saw us. And he's like, I heard you. And Jaime doesn't seem that ruffled by it. But Cersei's really upset. Because if anybody finds out that she's been screwing her twin brother and she's the queen, it would be bad. So, all in all, what happens is Jaime looks back at Cersei. And he almost shrugs, and he's like, the things I do for love. And he pushes Bran out the window of this tower. He pushes a 10-year-old out the window of the tower. And the very last scene is Bran falling hundreds of feet. Or at least it looks pretty far. I don't really know how it is. But hey, that's how it ends. It ends with twins screwing and a 10-year-old getting thrown out the window. So, it's obviously a different kind of show. And that's what got me hooked. Right there and right then. Welcome to Game of Thrones, everybody. So, as you can see, it's not your typical show. So, that's the first episode. And I know it was basically just a retelling of the episode. But I gotta be very careful about what I say. I don't want to give away anything, really, that's too important. So basically, it looks like it's a story about the Starks and the Lannisters and an occurrence that will lead to bad things between these two families. And you think it's a pretty simple formula, but it ends up being much more complicated than that, as you'll see as the series goes on. And it's one of the most amazing shows on TV. And a lot of people really like season 1 because it does stick to the books a lot. And then they start complaining as it changes from the book. But I love the show, and I don't really have a problem with it being slightly different because then I can enjoy it twice. I'll watch the show and I'll love the show, and then when the show finally ends, I'll read the books and I'll love the books. I've already started on reading the books, but anyway, as I said in my intro, I don't read ahead, because I don't want to spoil things, even though everybody on the internet wants to spoil things for me. So anyway, that was the gist of the very first episode, and I'm trying to think if there's anything I left out. I've got about 3 minutes left in the screen caps, but there's people here now, so I could get interrupted easily. Let me see what I want to say here. It's very hard probably to keep track of everything if this is the first time you've watched the show and all the different characters and all that. But if you just watch and rewatch, it gets very easy. And also, I always tell people, leave the captioning on, because that makes things much easier as well. So another thing to note here is the very first scene of the episode, you see these White Walkers, and then so much other stuff happens that you almost forget about that. But a big theme of the show is everybody in the show doesn't seem to believe in these things. They even say, you know, the White Walkers haven't been seen for thousands of years, and there are no dire wolves south of the wall, and all this other stuff. Nobody believes in all these mythical, magical creatures. But as you can see, they're all wrong, because these things are actually there. They actually exist. Now the question is, have they always existed? Or did they go away for a while? And now they're starting to come back into the world. And if the latter is true, which it looks like it is, it's very, very interesting to how this show is going to go from this point, because it is technically a fantasy show. And you forget a lot of that because you see a little bit of fantasy at the very beginning, and then it's all just a drama talking about the differences between these people and the conflicts that arise between all these people because of their different wants and desires and actions and all that. And a lot of the show, I'm not giving anything away, a lot of the show deals with that. As you can see just by the first episode, you get a little bit of supernatural fantasy stuff, and then the rest is all, you know, just interactions between characters. But a big theme of the show is nobody really realizes what the real threat is. They're all so caught up in all their own stuff that they don't realize what's really coming for all of them. And that's what is going to make the show so interesting. All the infighting and the problems they seem to have with each other are going to end up meaning absolutely nothing in the end, because there's so much more in store for all these people. And that's what's the great fun about this show. They all think that they need to worry about themselves, getting power, staying in power, but they really have to worry about what's really coming for all of them. Whether you're a king or a noble or nobody, you're all going to be in trouble, and you need to pay attention. And that's just the great thing about Game of Thrones, because the audience knows it's not about what they think it's about, what the characters think it's about. It's about so much more, and that's what is so much fun about this show. So, hope to see you for the next episode, and thanks for watching this. And, see you next time.